Whoa, we're back for some Bleach Soul Resonance. And thank you. Just really quickly before we get into a tier list video and all that, I want to say thank you to everyone who's watched in the past few days, past few weeks, because the videos have been doing really well, and that's very encouraging for me to keep making them, to keep getting them out, daily, twice daily, etc., really pushing to, meet that goal. Unfortunately, what has happened as a byproduct of that is I'm getting a lot of little DMs and pings and comments and stuff, and it's really hard to respond to all of it. So before we get into this, I just want to say thank you to anyone who does comment. Thank you to anyone who does send me messages. I do try to read them, but with life being busy and then Dokkan and Bleach Soul Resonance being busy, it is very difficult then to sort of find room in my social battery to respond to all of it. But I do see it. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Now, time for the matter at hand, which is a little bit of a tier list, right? Now, we have enough characters, and if you remember, I did skip the Gin release tier list because I don't want tier lists to feel like, what is it? I don't want tier lists to feel redundant, and I don't want tier lists to just serve as like, click here. I kind of do want the tier list to feel like something you'd want to see a little bit of a meta roundup. And more importantly, how do my tier lists work? Let's get into it. My tier lists work based on free-to-play expectations and what I think the character gives to account either short-term or long-term. So this is my previous tier list. It is all ordered. Aizen is the strongest character in the game. I said Yudahara is the second strongest in the game, and Ichigo, Bankai Ichigo at this point, had a real case for being the third strongest character in the game, just so far as he is, the only slash that was really dominant. And I thought that Toshido's issue was that Aizen is a support character who also does damage. So it just felt like if you don't have Toshido, it's not that big a deal so long as you have Aizen. That makes sense? Hope that makes sense. Account defining. The characters you need most to sort of have stable account progress. Must-have characters you do want to keep on top of because they are either very good supports or very good DPSs. Maybe they're just missing one or two pieces to really be exceptional. Strong dupes, characters who are not must-have, but with dupes they're still usable. And filler arc are the SR characters that I just don't think matter that much, if I'm honest. Like, in the grand scheme of things, you could have argued that like maybe Shikai Ichigo was exempt from this, but I would argue that Shikai Ichigo, if you were playing Bleach Soul Resonance around the time, like on launch, you should have just rerolled for Bankai Ichigo if it mattered that much, right? Shikai Ichigo is just a fix to being lazy. The laziness being, of course, not rerolling for Bankai Ichigo. Now, we have had the inclusion of Gin and Rangiku since the beginning of this, this cycle of the meta, cycle. While we haven't had any events that have sort of power crept the characters, and the devs have been very generous about always giving us limited characters to actually do these events, rather than having to rely solely on who we pull, who we don't pull, etc., etc. That means that the only thing really power creeping characters is tower floors. We got additional tower floors, which are very hard for free-to-plays, I will say, and the characters themselves. So let us start with firstly moving characters around who might need to be moved, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so Bankai Ichigo I do not think goes up here anymore, and in fact I think Toshido gets a spot over him. Byakuya, I'm gonna say, goes to the bottom of must-have. I find him to be a cumbersome, kind of unnecessary tactics character, because in the cases where you want to be using Byakuya, you could just be using Aizen, and we've had very few examples of content where we couldn't be using Tosin or Komamura while we use Aizen for our slash team. So I will say Byakuya, while it's not a super big deal, I do think he moves down just due to necessity. I would say that Ikkaku maybe comes down here to just being sort of an unnecessary character, if I'm very honest. I think he's just a character who flat out, he could be filler arc. Like, he's, at this point, you either have Gin or, your thrust team is just not very good. Gin is just that strong. Tosin is still very strong. Yachido, I do like being in the mix of very strong characters. I think she feels like the strongest, like one of the strongest limited characters, period. Momo, I think, is exceptional. Now that we're sort of out of her celebration, her event, we see these people talk about her. But especially for free-to-plays, I think she's extremely powerful support unit. And obviously, she's easily dupable. She's easily, you know, weapon stamp and core stamp upgradable due to being an SR. Nemu, Nemu should probably stay down here, and then Ikaku stays right here. Yachidu got buffed. I think you could argue that Yachidu is actually closer to here now. And is that the list so far? If you're wondering, filler arc isn't ordered or anything. It's just sort of a bunch of characters. I think the actual state of the game is something like this, but you know, it doesn't matter. Maybe something closer to this, but it doesn't really matter. I don't think the SRs are, these filler arc SRs are so much worse than each other. Now, let's get into the new characters, because that's what we're all really here for, right? So, we will start with Gin. Gin is exceptional in every conceivable way you could want a character to be exceptional. He is a very strong, dupeless character. His weapon does everything you would need it to do, providing him with not only crit rate, but just flat damage buffs, as well as a bonus on his counterattack, which does a brick of damage, gives him technique points back, etc., etc. This is probably one of the single best weapon stamps in the game, I think. Like, am I crazy to say that? Would you guys like rate Gin's weapon stamp as one of the strongest? I think it gives him so much. Is this not just like a brick of text? Like, compare that to, you know, this one right here, right? Where it's like, you get a counterattack, you get some crit rate, which is the same as Gin's, and then like a much smaller passive here. You know, Gin by comparison has the crit rate, damage bonus, counterattack, stacks, attack points for impale go up at 30%, like just a bunch of stuff. This is what I sort of mean when I say that. The big thing about the limited characters is they just have fuller kits. They have fuller descriptions to their abilities. It makes them crazy. Core stamp is also nuts. Huge damage percentages on this. If the target is already suffering an ongoing debuff, ailment damage dealt by Gin is increased by an additional, or an extra rather, 30%. Crazy core stamp. Core stamp patch made it really easy to get these core stamps. If you've been wondering, and this is going to just be a slight detour, I get one copy of the new core stamp, and then I start saving. You can see I'm at 18. By the time our next character comes around, you know, I might have like 30 of these, right? However many I do end up getting. So I'm just not spending them. There's no reason to spend them. My Kenpachi is doing just fine. Would it be cool if I got more? Sure, but he doesn't need it. But back to Gin. Yeah, Gin is just a smooth character. He works with so many supports. He works with so many setups. Tosin, Aizen, both being very powerful on him. One of the things that's very powerful about Gin is, though he is the best with Aizen, because everyone sort of is, Gin and Tosin are extremely strong together. And I think that is a plus. Like, I don't think you can deny how good it is to sort of have Gin with his, attribute support, like tactic support, and it actually matter. It actually trigger his abilities. Whereas a lot of characters in the game are sort of Aizen merchants. Now, we will get into that with other characters, but I will say that Aizen doesn't carry, our two new limited units as much as he just helps them reach their full potential. But other characters certainly are relying on Aizen. I think that to some degree Toshido is relying on Aizen. And if you use any of these other characters who are just like not as good characters, like Yachido or Yoruichi characters like Ikaku, you really feel that. Gin does not have that problem. His boundaries, thankfully, don't feel that necessary. I mean, getting the technique when you enter the battle is very good, and everyone technique point consumed, increasing the crit damage of the next ultimate is pretty good as well. Is pretty nice. I would say that this is when the argument for being like less ailment damage, more just like flat out hit damage goes up. And you can see that sort of these increases make his ability to do these big attack percents go up. But beyond that, I think one of the things that makes Geen so nice is that he makes use of what I would call niche gear. And niche gear being things like ailment damage here. Like, usually ailment damage would ruin a piece like this for most characters. This is a pretty good piece here. I'm not going to say anything about that. But ailment damage. This would be a pretty bad piece on a lot of characters. For Geen, this is like, you know, best in slot, which means because he's using such specific gear, and because even if you're not using such specific gear, you can switch over to much more standard gear. It makes him really easy to get stats onto, right? Because you don't need this much, as well as he came with his own bond, which once you get it to 80% damage bonus here, you get an extra 80% to your actual ailment damage bonus, as well as a big chunk of technique damage. Geen is a very impressive character, and for that reason, I'm gonna say that Geen is kind of account defining. I'm not gonna lie. Geen feels really good. I think Geen feels ahead enough of the rest of the cast in his power at B0 that we could really start having some conversations about him being as important to the thrust team as someone like Urahara is to, you know, general teams. Like, he is so strong. He is so strong. You know what I mean? I think Geen is very nice. And the other reason that I try to make these lists and be like, you know, like I talk up these characters is, if you're someone who pulled for Geen, the next time we get a thrust DPS, you might look at this and you might be like, do I really need that thrust DPS? Of course the character is going to try to power creep characters like Geen, and of course we have a lot of characters that we can get because the game is very rewarding when it comes to pulling for characters. But you're still going to want to think like, maybe I skip this one because I have Geen, you know? Maybe Geen is good enough for me for now, right? Like, that is a big thing. I do think that is a big thing. So let's move on to Rangiku. And Rangiku is a character that, again, I've been extremely high on. The big reason in particular is... Where is it? Oh, it is 2, right? Yeah, Haneko's assistant grants teammates extra ailment damage bonus equal to 30% of Rangiku's damage bonus to her ailments. You can see here that I have a ton of ailment damage bonus, way too much. Obviously, I would rather have her on more attack percent, things like that, to make her passive stronger, which is this assistant thing she actually puts on the characters. However, you know, we're realistic players here. We're not whales. We're realistic. So I have her on a set that I would argue is inefficient. I would rather have her on the Urahara set with more attack percent, but because this is how it shapes up, this is how it shapes up. Her core stamp is given to a large degree by the event bonus. Her weapon stamp is given at a full Ascension 5 for free, for completely free. And she herself is Boundary Awaken level 6 for completely free, which makes her a dynamite unit, as well as I think that if you have her built really well, then she can be one of the hardest supporting units in the game, period, from what I've seen. Like, if you have her on a team with like Aizen, she can be doing, like, providing up to, you know, the 50s of millions in damage on a character who's not exactly an ailment or thrust character, right? This is not a character who solely needs to contribute with, you know, thrust characters, even though, you know, she is obviously buffing thrust damage, right? It's just that this Haneko's mark passive is just so good that it's kind of hard to ignore just the attack percent buffing. So, you know, because it's doing the on-field character's attack, which means that she does not need the percent herself. Very, very powerful. Very, very powerful character. I would say that for Rangiku, I mean, I could argue her as high as here almost, I think. Do I think that? Yeah, I think I do. I think because this is a free-to-play account, this is a free-to-play tier list, so this isn't like, you know, Yoruichi with perfect dupes and everything. And remember, my Yoruichi has a core stamp 5, like Ascension 5 core stamp. So she is stronger than the average Yoruichi, and she has one dupe from the standard pool. So it's not like I don't have, you know, her buffed a little more than like other characters. But what Rangiku does, what she could possibly give is it's pretty remarkable to me. It's pretty remarkable to me. I would definitely place her here. Yeah. And last but not least, we knew we'd get into Big Daddy eventually, which is Kenpachi Zaraki. So, starting off, I would have said that this character would have been like a must-have, strong with dupes, maybe the top of strong dupes or the bottom of must-have, just because he had some conditions that needed to be fulfilled to really get anything out of him. But with the buff to his core stamp, and honestly, this is the only buff that actually needed to happen. They didn't need to touch the rest of his kit. Giving him 20% extra crit rate alleviates the constraints we have on his gear. What that means is my Kenpachi now has a 70% chance to crit. You know, it's conditional, but 70% chance to crit conditionally, like a lot of characters are conditional. Which means we can focus points into other things, like getting his ailment damage bonus up, like getting his crit damage bonus up, like getting his monster attack percent stat up, right? His attack, or his flat attack stat up, which we do have in this case, right? And this is not perfect gear by any means. This is some of the earliest gear I've gotten. But what it has caused is a ripple effect where I'm no longer spending my energy on supplying Kenpachi. What I'm doing instead is I'm back to collecting resources. I can do that because Kenpachi has ended up being so powerful. This is what I mean when I say that buffing characters isn't always just about the character strength. Sometimes it's an account-wide. Sometimes buffing a character means that you alleviate the gear grind so much inadvertently that we don't even need to spend our stamina on, you know, this, that, and the third. Instead, we can stockpile it. Because we're stockpiling this stamina, we're able to pour it into rounding out our account strength. And I know what you might be hearing this being like, what does this all have to do with Kenpachi's power? I just mean that that's how great the buff was. That it made him so powerful that 4 days into having the character, I've essentially stopped grinding Kenpachi gear. Think about that. Think about that. I've stopped grinding Kenpachi gear. Like, he's already, in my mind, he's done essentially. I still have 3 nourishers, right? So, the things that make him strong are a sort of a wealth of ability to switch out. The moment you press this button, you can switch out. After the change to his animations, I believe you can switch out the moment you hold this down as well. Or it might be like a second, and then you can switch out, but it's made it even faster, which means you don't have to wait until the end where he does the stab anymore. The moment you go into the sky with Spiritual Pressure Burst, you can switch out. And his attack window with his ultimate lines up perfectly with a character like Aizen, who is shifting crit damage, I believe, in his ult once you have his core stamp and everything, onto the character who's in, meaning you can get this character ulting, you can get this character swinging away, ult again, and then release with Aizen for, you know, millions of damage. And all of that's being done, and this character is still out damaging Aizen with the perfect setup, right? So it was impressive. I would say that this is still a pretty good boundary if you're going to get it. This is also a very good boundary if you're going to get it, just because 30% alleviated crit means that you're less, you rely on crit less to actually, you know, proc your weapon. And 2, because you're proccing this weapon so much, a lot of the damage you're getting is coming from the, you know, this bit here. So it's a hugely damaging source for Kenpachi. So the more crit rate you can get, the more your Kenpachi will shine, especially. And that is why, even though I would say that I could just send this to level 30 and I could be fine with it, but I am still sort of chasing that attack percent main stat, you know, maybe 2 or 3 points in crit rate, third piece. Same with something like this. I could easily benefit from changing this one if I really wanted to push it, though I do like this piece. And I could easily get more crit rate here, though I do, again, like this piece. This was still at a time where I thought the ailment damage bonus was going to be necessary if I decided to dupe this character, but I might end up switching this piece out rather, for a crit rate piece that is a little more impressive. All of these all of this taken into account with the fact that I essentially am like done with Kenpachi and haven't even been grinding gear. The only gear I've been grinding with him now is the daily 2 we get from reset, which is crazy. Like I said, he's only been out for like 5 days or something. Like, I guess this is about to be 6 days right here. You can see up here. So to be essentially done building a character so quickly because of the buffs, I mean, it's really impressive. I'd say he'd have to go up here. Remember that this list is specifically talking about free-to-play. This is how valuable I think the characters are to your free-to-play account. We can go over the list and I'll just quickly do a little bit of summation. Aizen is the best character in the game, bar none. You could always fit Aizen onto a team. Every team essentially is made better by having Aizen on it. There's no character that supports enough that having Aizen's bonus damage isn't just a net gain for the team and your scores as a whole. Yodahara continues to just be the best support in the game. What he gives to every DPS is unmatched, and you would always rather have Yodahara on a team over, you know, the other supports, even though they are very strong themselves. Kenpachi feels like a better character than Gin now, and if I have Gin up here, then I would definitely have to have Kenpachi up here. I do think both of them, when we talked about both of them at the same time, I do think both of them are valuable enough to be placed here. I do think both of them shine more than Toshido and Bankai Ichigo at a base level, especially for free-to-plays. I think you essentially need nothing out of these characters to make them really, really pop. One thing I would like to have seen with Toshido is him getting paired with a freeze character of some kind that would, you know, playing around the freeze mechanic, playing around his freeze mechanic. That way, maybe he would have a higher upside beyond just getting dupes in him, because obviously any of these limited DPSs with dupes will shine really hard. But again, these are at 0. Toshido, I do still think, even though my Toshido is underbuilt for sure, I do think that his upside, especially now that Kenpachi's in the game and thus Ichigo looks like less of a factor, I do think his upside is really high still. Bankai Ichigo is going to start looking like a little bit more like a relic, though I don't think he's bad or unusable or anything. I certainly think a character like Ikkaku has gotten, you know, the shorter end of that stick. I mean, look how far down he is. Tozen only got better with the actual Gin update. Characters like Gin and Rangiku just make him proc so much. You're constantly using his battlefield skill now. You're constantly in his ult. You're constantly proccing passives and, you know, doing this, that, and the third. So he feels really strong. Again, he's not quite good enough, especially without dupes or anything, to compete with the case of like Aizen, who is just way too powerful, way too dominant in this meta. Rangiku, I've said enough about. She is, to me, a limited character hiding as an SR. I think she's really powerful. I think that this character will be around for a while, and I think that because she's giving ailment damage, don't expect her to just be a character who sticks around for thrust teams. I think we could see her definitely existing on a Hado team, or a Spirit team rather, with like a, I don't know, Spirit Yamamoto who does burn damage, right? I do think that is possible, and I don't think it's going to be limited to thrust forever. Yoruichi just feels like the second best standard character. Obviously my Yoruichi experience is a little buffed because I do have her at 1 boundary, I do have her at 5 core stamp, you know, so she does just feel a little better to me. That said, the other reason I think that she feels a little better to me is that her role isn't being contended with half as much as someone like Byakuya. Byakuya is directly challenged by Aizen's existence, and while you can say, well, what about Tozen? I think Tozen being so much stronger than this roster, it feels like, and what he's up to with Gin, his sort of, you know, obvious what is it, chemistry with Gin and Rangiku means that he does shine even more so after that patch, whereas a character like Byakuya, and with his sort of limited chemistry with characters, it just doesn't feel as good. Also, I find him very awkward to play for that reason. Yoruichi, just being a very strong DPS, being probably my favorite standard DPS now that the dust has sort of settled. Yeah, it goes back to what I said there. I don't know if Strike needs another DPS right now. I think Strike needs supports. I think Strike needs tactics characters. If Thrust had the strike version of Aizen, we wouldn't even be talking about replacing Yoruichi, I think, personally. So, Nemo, not Nemo, oh my god, Momo, sorry. Momo is a very strong support. I think that she only really suffers from the fact that she was the first sort of limited banner unit. Rangiku, by comparison, feels like a much more stable and a much more fluid character to play, though I do think the things that Momo like gives off are very powerful by themselves. Byakuya he's fine. I did a lot of ranting already. I just find him kind of clunky and awkward. A lot of his stamped as well, a lot of his boundaries are kind of selfish. That's one thing you see with the standard units, is a lot of the standard units get their boundary 1 or boundary 2, and it's a great support boost. And then they get like boundary 3, 4, and 5, and it's like, or boundary 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And it's like, oh no, this is like, you want me to play like DPS Byakuya? You're like, I don't know. Yachiru got buffed. She's very strong with Kenpachi. Also, I just think she's the least clunky of the characters here to play as a support. With one dupe on Komomura, you get a big chunk of critical damage. Do not be surprised if, when the selector comes around, instead of picking someone like Kisuke, you take one Komomura. Just imagine if Strike Nellel is a thing. You know, she turns into the big horse. She's a really strong support. I guess she's a tactics character though. Never mind. I was gonna say if she was a support character, but we do know she's a tactics character, so you'll probably be Slash or something. So he'll probably be replaced. But if Strike got a strong support and this character was giving like 40% critical damage with boundary 1, we'd be talking. His boundaries beyond that just seem to give him damage a lot of times. I think he's fine, but he has the same issue that Orihime has, which is he's essentially a character who is a defensive support in a game where you'd rather just dodge and kill the enemy. Maybe at some point we'll see a game mode where healing and the like are actually valuable at all. But for right now, you know, the strongest thing that Orihime gives is her all-type damage bonus. I think that's what she gives. Ikkaku, I feel like his animations are just very clunky and unwieldy, especially when you compare them to Gin, who is so selfless on the field. Gin is so selfless. Gin does everything he has to do without ever really missing a beat. I think that for a free-to-play player, if you skipped Gin and you're still using Ikkaku, it's probably hard for me to quantify how much worse it feels to use Ikkaku, how much longer he feels like he sticks on the field, how much less he gets done while on the field. That just is what it is, especially when you compare it to Tosin, who is a character who likes to be swapped in. Tosin wants to be swapped in. Tosin wants to use his own animations. Tosin wants to use his Bankai and go through his core stamp and then his technique and then his battlefield skill. All that time, Gin could be swapped in using his technique points back to Tosin. Rangiku could be swapped in using her technique back to Tosin. You know what I mean? Like, I think Ikkaku just suffers in that way, though he does have some animation cancels that alleviate this. I mean, it's just in the same way. I think Nemu, her biggest problem is that she spends a lot of time on field compared to the other supports. She does have an animation cancel where she gets both of her buffs up, though from what I can tell, this does take a little bit of doing itself, and the rotation just feels awkward. Rukia, she has Aizen problems. She will be much better when she gets an SSR at some point. Same with Orihime. She has other support problems, Momo problems, Yodahara problems, Aizen problems. She'll be much better when she gets an SSR, where they put her in the game. They say, give your character a shield, and so long as the shield's up, your character gets 100% crit damage, right? Like, SSR Orihime will at some point show up. She'll at some point be really strong. It's just not right now. And that's my list. Do you like it? Do you hate it? What am I, Anthony Fantano? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? That's my list. I hope a lot of these positions made sense. This is just where I'm at for free-to-plays. I do not know anything about being a whale. I do not know anything about Boundary 6 characters. I do not know anything about Boundary 3 characters. I do not know anything about Boundary 4 characters, etc., etc. This is what I think you should be pulling on if you are someone who is free-to-play and you're budgeting your stones or your jade, and who you should be building, essentially. So if, say, I have Aizen, Yodahara, Kenpachi, and Gin, and I'm like, who should I build next? Well, from left to right, I'd probably build my Aizen, probably build my Yodahara. Then I'd probably start building DPSs, right? That's just how it goes. You're going to need to decide on who you build. Then going into must-have, you might be like, okay, now that I've built my team out, now I essentially have a strike team. I literally could make this a thrust team. Who should I get next? Well, with that same logic, you should build Toshido out. If you don't have Kenpachi, you could build Bankai Ichigo out, and so on and so forth. Helping out Gin with his thrust package here, and then getting your strike team up, possibly another support, and then your slash tactics up. That's the logic. But yes, thank you if you stuck around this long. I'd appreciate it if you liked the video, subscribed, etc. I usually don't, ask in outside of the outro. So I've been Lone. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the club. We'll go make it, and peace.